We have a call to order and then roll call in case you don't have the agenda up in front.
Thanks. I'm trying to get it to load here. My computer's being on.
So while she's doing that, Vicki, do you want to do roll call, please?
Sure. Davidson.
Here.
Donovan.
Here.
Fleetwood.
Here.
Hawkinson.
Here.
Huffman.
Here.
Corchise.
Here.
Sadoo. We do have Executive Sadoo. Darwin.
Present.
And do we have board members Lilliquist or Lautenbach? I'm not seeing either one at this time. Thank you.
All right. Calling to order April 17th, WTA special meeting. Sorry, my computer is cutting in and out. I hope it's not cutting in and out for you, but I'm having to pull up the packet on my phone.
So in order to help, the only item for today is the discussion of zero emission fleet transition study part 2.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to thank the board members for making time for the continuation of this discussion and dedicating another hour to continue it. We've got the same group of consultants as last time that are here, and thanks to them too. I can't see if we have some that the other Paul may be from the East Coast, so it's late there. Appreciate that.
He's not going to be here with us today, unfortunately, but we have some other members of STV here in his stead.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, with that, I will. Tim, do you want to say anything?
I think we could just turn it right over to Paul. Yeah.
Paul, if we could turn it over to you, please.
All righty. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Please let me know if you all can see this okay.
Got it.
Got it. Okay, great. So yeah, we're here talking about kind of part 2 of the study. Just kind of a quick little refresh. Last time, it's already been 3 weeks since we had that first discussion. Give a little overview of the technology, talked a little bit about the policy and funding mechanisms that are kind of driving this transition, and then got into the really detailed operational analysis, which we spent kind of the bulk of the time talking about. So today, we are going to be talking about site upgrades at your main base there at Moab, and then really diving into the transition plan options for how you might get from where you are today to a fully zero emissions fleet. And those will touch on cost and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with each of those 3 different options. And then we'll talk kind of long-term timelines and specifically the next kind of 5 years or so, what WTA might do to get to that point. So any questions before we dive in? And please interrupt me at any time if anybody has any questions. I'll do my best to see hands raised or anything, but just talk over me at any point. So in terms of Moab, the site upgrades, I'm going to talk quickly about kind of the site upgrades for both a fully electric fleet and a fully fuel cell fleet, and note that one of the options would be kind of a blend of the two, but we're going to kind of highlight the 2 extremes here. So hopefully you guys can all see the site layout here. So what we're showing here is a full fleet of an electric bus on your Moab main site there. We're also showing build out on the north lot there that could be used for paratransit or additional electric bus fleet. But if you do go fully electric, you've got room for about 84 40-foot electric buses and associated charging infrastructure on your main site there. Those are highlighted in 4 different colors for different phasing. If you choose to do this in phases, if you decide to go kind of overhead pantograph chargers, that was one of the technologies we talked about last time. You would probably do that in chunks. If you do it, if you go plug-in, kind of the cheaper option, you could do that kind of more on an as-needed basis, but that's what the color coding is showing there. So in addition to all the different charging infrastructure, there's a variety of other improvements that would be needed on site to accommodate these technologies. The biggest is that you're going to need about 2 additional megawatts of additional electrical load capacity. That's kind of the additional load that will be required to charge all these buses if you go fully electric. Now, I know WTA is doing some internal investigations working with PSC to figure out, what kind of transformer upgrades, switch gears, all that associated electrical infrastructure needs will be. That's not included in this, but there is likely to be some additional electrical infrastructure requirements to support that level of electrical load. And then in addition to that, one of the other big concerns with going fully electric is what do you do in case of an emergency? If you lose power, what are you going to do? How are you going to charge your buses? So we definitely recommend some backup generator or a backup generator or multiple backup generators. You could do that a number of different ways. You could do it with a diesel fire generator or hook up to a natural gas line. We're recommending 2 to 3 megawatts of backup generator here to be able to charge your fleet and keep it up and running in those times of emergency, or just to keep your main operations underway. And then one of the other big upgrades that would be necessary, specifically indoors, would be increased fire suppression. The biggest risk with an electric bus in terms of safety on site here is the event of a thermal event. One of those batteries catches fire. The lithium inside is self-sustaining. It's very hard to put those fires out. So you want to make sure you've got additional fire suppression for any safety concerns there. These events are very unlikely, but they do happen. So you just want to make sure you're prepared for those needs. And then in addition, there would be some maintenance bay upgrades. You'd want better or additional access to the bus's roofs where some of those batteries might be housed. You do have some roof access today in your maintenance bays, but you'd likely need some additional roof access there. And then you'd probably want to install some what we call hotel charging, which is kind of low power chargers in the maintenance bays, just to do little charging as needed there, given that your main charging operations would be outside the maintenance facility itself. And then the report will also highlight this, but there's a kind of a suite of staff training that would need to be done just to familiarize everybody with this new technology, make sure everybody is aware of all the safety needs, dealing with these large electrical loads or fuel cell, which we'll touch on here in a second. So any questions there?
I have one.
Sure.
We keep talking about, like this, in your case, 2 megawatts of additional load, which isn't a huge chunk of electricity, but it's a big chunk. And I continually question if everybody does all of this, where's all the additional power coming from? And I don't think that your analysis is going to cover that, but I guess I'm going to ask the question, is anybody looking at where all the additional power is going to come from?
It's a great question. I mean, I would say the state is, obviously aggressively pushing the electrification of everything. They've set pretty strict targets to get everybody fully electric.
I understand they're putting a higher and higher and higher demand on the grid. How's it going to get here, and who's going to generate it?
Short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I kind of thought that, but okay. Just wanted to hear it.
Sure.
Thanks.
If I could chime in there just to add on to that question, and it's obviously a critical question. And one of the things we advise clients is it's never too early to start talking to your utility. The charging infrastructure we're recommending, which is sort of the state of the art, even though it's based on historically existing traction power type stuff that you'd see on any electrified rail system, is it's medium voltage. So we're talking, typically around 12,000 volts to make it efficiently operational. So, where's that line coming from? Where's the nearest substation? In the terms of resiliency, can you get 2 circuits? So maybe you're not relying on emergency backup generators as much. Those dialogues with the utilities are really essential to get started, 2 years at least before you think you're going to start breaking ground on some of these larger projects. The small pilot programs, no problem. But for the bigger stuff, you want to be talking to them.
Looks like Sat Paul has a question.
Sorry, somehow my video camera is dead, but anyways, you can hear me. I have a similar question, is that we're talking 2040 or 2035 to 2040 when we'll be getting to this point of net zero. Have you looked into what kind of technology changes will be in the battery technology? Because things are changing so fast, just like 5 years ago, what we had and what we have now and what we'll have 5 years from, like 2030. I believe that there will be a substantial technological advances in these batteries. And this kind of prompted me from your fire question. Any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I will touch on that a little bit later in the presentation, but the short answer is we expect about a 5% increase per year in battery energy density. And we've seen faster than that. The last few years, we've seen quite a bit more than that, but that's what we're forecasting going forward.
Okay.
Alrighty, I'm gonna keep moving here. So second site plan layout here is for full fuel cell bus deployment. Obviously you have a number of electric buses already, but if you choose to go fully fuel cell, again, you have space for about 84 fuel cells fuel cell buses on your Moab main lot there. We're showing an additional hydrogen storage, actually 2 units up in the top right corner there. And then you would transition your paratransit fleet off to the north lot there. And you would also have room for some additional electric buses there if you wanted. So that hydrogen fuel cell tank is going to cost about $4.5 million for a size that would be able to supply a fleet of about 50 fuel cell buses. So you would need 2 of those once you go fully fuel cell. Todd, you got a question?
Yeah, did you have was there a price tag on the previous slide?
There will be an overall price for both options. We'll show that here soon. But yeah, in short, it depends a lot on which technologies you select. And so that's kind of what the full build out of your site would look like. If you go fuel cell, obviously at a high level, it doesn't look hugely different. But then in terms of the additional site needs, safety is kind of the biggest concern with hydrogen. It's a colorless, odorless gas. If it does leak, it's hard to detect. So you need some detection alarms and some increased ventilation because it's highly flammable. You don't want that stuff floating up to the roof anywhere near even electrical lights. You want to obviously avoid that situation. So you're going to need some additional H2 detection alarms, ventilation. You will also want some increased fire suppression because fuel cell buses are electric motors. They have big batteries on board that is supplied by the hydrogen fuel cell. So there is the risk of a thermal event, as we say, on these vehicles as well. So you do want that increased fire suppression. And similar maintenance bay upgrades that I discussed with the electric buses, you want more roof access, that kind of thing. And obviously a host of staff training as well for this technology. I know I'm going really quickly here, but we have a fair amount to cover and I want to make sure we don't miss anything. So any questions on that one? Alrighty, so that's kind of the high level layout for both fully electric and fuel cell vehicles. So then the question is, what are your options going forward? So what we're showing here is we're specifically talking about the fixed route fleet right now. So the fleet composition by year. So 2022 all the way on the left, I understand that it is 2023 now, but when we got started, it was 2022. So basically your fleet is currently 52 diesel buses, 8 hybrids and 2 electric buses. And so we're forecasting out, to 2040, what's going to happen. So we understand that you're going to be taking delivery of 2 more electric buses here shortly, with 8 more coming next year. And then the kind of the short-term plan in 2025, 2026, and 2027 is any replacement needs at that point will be met with hybrids. And then so really you have a few years, we'll cover this a little bit later, to kind of determine where you're going to go after that. So at that 2027 point, what technology is going to be for the next kind of tranche of vehicles at that point? And so we're saying you're going to kind of use the intervening years to evaluate your existing electric buses, the electric buses that you'll be taking delivery of over the next 2 years, or really the next 18 months. And then kind of figure out where this market is going, any changes that are coming, and before you really need to make a decision, and we'll touch on that a little bit. So then what are the different options for that kind of big question mark there for that different that zero emission propulsion technology? So the report is kind of put together 3 different options. The first option, as I mentioned earlier, would be a fully electric fleet. This requires significant infrastructure investment, but BEVs are a little bit cheaper to buy than fuel cell vehicles and are probably cheaper to fuel as well. I say probably because hydrogen fuel is kind of a big question mark at this point. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but it's very hard to get your hands on right now in big quantities, and we don't have a great idea of what hydrogen is going to cost 10 years from now, where electricity is a little bit easier to forecast. The big downside with that is the logistics associated with charging. These buses have limited ranges and they need to spend hours and hours every day charging. Then the second option would be is if kind of the other end of the spectrum is if you go all fuel cell after 2027. Again, it requires significant infrastructure investment. Those hydrogen fueling stations are not cheap, but they are less expensive than fully building out a charger network on site. They are kind of big 1 or 2 time investments instead of kind of being done in chunks as you transition. And as I noted earlier, fuel cell vehicles are more expensive to buy and probably more expensive to fuel than electric buses. And again, the single biggest issue here is the lack of available hydrogen. We touched on that in the previous presentation a few weeks ago. But there just is not great availability of hydrogen at the moment. And while there are a number of efforts underway to change that, it's kind of hard to say with certainty when hydrogen will be more available. And then the third option is a blend of those 2 technologies. So you buy some electric buses, you buy some hydrogen buses, and kind of mix and match that way, depending on your needs at the time. This gives you a little more flexibility if you have, if electric buses never get to the point where they can meet all of your route needs, maybe you could buy a few hydrogen buses for those really demanding routes that travel really long distances. The bus is out for 8 to 10 hours without coming back and is really racking up the mileage. Downside to this is that it requires both types of infrastructure upgrades. You need both your hydrogen compression station and your electric bus chargers, and you're going to need to train staff on how to deal with both technologies. Those are your 3 options. And then just gonna hit you with the total cost here. So this is estimated total cost through 2040 for all these different options. So we have at the bottom, I'm essentially going to call business as usual. So if you keep buying diesel, this isn't really an option, but this is just to understand what the kind of the status quo is. So how much you would spend buying, replacing vehicles, any infrastructure. There's no infrastructure needs associated with diesel buses. How much you'd spend on fuel and maintenance. These are all estimates here. So for diesel, it's going to cost you, assuming you can just keep buying diesel buses, it would cost you about $130 million. And again, these are in inflated dollars. So this is not in 2022 dollars. So we're assuming a 5% inflation every year. So we're saying it's going to cost about $130 million to continue your existing operations with a diesel bus. If you choose to go hybrid buses, that number bumps up quite a bit, jumps up to about 170 million because those buses are so much more expensive. You do save on fuel. Maintenance is a little bit more expensive with those vehicles, but the vehicles themselves are quite a bit more expensive to buy. And then really for the zero emission options, kind of your the realistic options is if you go fully electric, the costs are going to fall somewhere between 215 and 235 million. That really depends on the charging technology you select. Again, those plug-in chargers are much cheaper than overhead pantographs, even though that's what the report recommends, as they do allow a lot more flexibility. So that's for a fully electric fleet. You do save on maintenance and fuel with those technologies compared to your hybrids. They're quite a bit cheaper to fuel. You're going to save a few $1,000,000. And then if you go fuel cell, again, those vehicles themselves are the most expensive. So you spend a huge chunk of money on the vehicles themselves. And you spend a little bit less on infrastructure compared to a fully electric fleet, and then a similar amount on maintenance and fuel. And those costs, again, vary. That one varies mostly depending on the cost of hydrogen itself. We're forecasting that hydrogen decreases by 50% from now to 2040. Hopefully that's the case. We don't really know. So that's why that range is in there. So in short, there is quite a premium to going zero emission over what's done today, roughly $80 million, $85 million on the low end. However, that doesn't account for any grants or any funding awards. So it's very unlikely that WTA will bear the full burden of that. Scott, question?
Yeah, I was just wondering on the 50% reduction in hydrogen costs. Is that just based on newer technology that's going to make it cheaper, or?
Scalability, I think, is the main argument there. As a number of, there's some work being done in Eastern Washington right now. Chelan Douglas is building an electrolyzer. The federal government has a number of programs that are really encouraging hydrogen build out. So they have a goal of getting it down to $2 a kilogram. It's about 7 or 8 right now. So that's a 40 or what is that, a 75% reduction. That seems a little aggressive to us. So we scaled that back a little bit. But again, there's a range in there for if it does or does not get cheaper.
And that electrolyzing, that would be a process that's basically breaking water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah, that would be a green hydrogen that's being built. Yeah, and the Chelan Douglas PUD is building that right now.
So what's the source of power to that?
It's hydro. Yeah, and that's opening in, I think, June 2024. But I don't know how much of that is already earmarked. My guess is a lot of that hydrogen is already earmarked for something. I don't know how much of it is going to be commercially available.
Yeah.
Scott, I have a question in the boardroom. This is Michael. Hi, I finally showed up. So with regard to hydrogen, there's like a $8 or $7 billion federal program to establish hydrogen hubs. I've heard talk in Washington State down south of here of hydrogen cooperatives.
Yep.
If WTA, as well as say Whatcom County, the PUD, City of Bellingham, if we're all looking at transition, if all of us think hydrogen might fit a niche in our fleets, what is the thinking on that? It seems like a lot of people are pushing this direction. We don't have to imagine going it alone.
Yeah, there's a lot of money and effort being poured into this. I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head that the infrastructure bill had for.
I think it was 9.5 billion.
9.5. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, there's a lot of money being spent trying to ramp up hydrogen availability. Yeah, we took our best guess, but it's going to change a lot over the next 5 years. So the situation today versus 2030, hard to say for sure. This is kind of why we've opened up the options instead of saying this is what you should do for going zero emission. These are kind of your different options. And we note that this is going to be a living document that probably should be updated somewhat regularly as you guys continue to purchase more electric buses or zero emission buses. And
Paul, let me ask it this way. There's at least two kinds of risk, probably a lot more than that. But one kind of risk is that hydrogen won't be available. The regional infrastructure or local won't exist. And the other risk is we don't know what the price will be.
Yes.
It seems like the price risk is impossible to avoid, but the first risk might not be that great if you look 10 years ahead or 15 years ahead. Yes or no?
Personally, I think you're probably right. I would not bet on the price, but I think there is going to be more of it in the near future, definitely. But yeah, I think you said it well there.
Jen, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed this before, but so with the zero, I know the zero emission options are zero emissions, but what percentage would diesel hybrid be in percentages as compared to that?
In terms of emission reductions,
Just like if the BEVs and FCEVs are zero emission, what percentage is diesel hybrid as compared to diesel?
I want to say they burn about 25% less fuel. So 25%.
5% more than the zero emission options, basically.
I mean, it's not a zero emission option, essentially. It's put in there for just as a kind of a comparison tool. It is a lower emission option, but it's not a zero emission option. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just a process question, and if you touched on this previously, I apologize, but what's the time frame that we're operating under before we need to make some decisions here?
We're going to get to that. It's soon. It's soon, but yeah, that the rest of the presentation we'll talk about the near term.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a nice transition point. So we're going to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas estimates, and then we'll get into that timeline. So there's a lot on the screen right here. I won't walk you through everything, but the left kind of documents our assumptions for what the what greenhouses are emitted for each of the different fuel types. We took a snapshot of PSE's current energy mix in 2021. And then, you know, as I noted earlier, the state has mandated that they be fully renewable by 2045. And so we have scaled down their emissions linearly between now and then, noting that it probably will not be linear. We, you know, summarized how much, you know, burning a gallon of diesel, how much CO2 is emitted, that kind of thing, how much, you know, documented the greenhouse gas estimates for making hydrogen, what the different hydrogen types are. That's all included in here. I won't read through all this because it's a lot of detail, but it's all going to be in the report for you all to pick apart. So talking right now about the all electric option. So what we're showing here is your annual emissions between 2022 and 2040. And we're showing all of the different vehicle propulsion technologies that would be in your fleet at each time. So if you look at 2022, obviously the large majority of your fleet is diesel. So your diesel fleet is emitting about 4,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. And so what we're showing here is as you scale up your BEB fleet, so the percent BEB fleet is shown in the dotted green lines. You see that number climb from whatever it is now, you know, 5% all the way up to 100 in 2040. What that does to emissions. And while I acknowledge that WTA would be operating a fully zero emissions fleet, we are including the emissions that would be generated by PSE generating that electricity. So that is baked into this. So we're saying it's going to be an 85% reduction in annual emissions by 2040. Those remaining emissions will be generated by PSE, not by WTA. So I do want to clarify that. And that assumes that everything would be completely GHG free in 2045 based on that state mandate. So really the other way to look at it is the green bar along the bottom. That's not really generated by WTA. That's all PSE emissions. So that's for the electric bus option. For the fuel cell, we're estimating about a 60% reduction from 2022 levels, which is about a 12.5% increase over the electric bus option. And we're saying that this is not assumed to be a net zero option by 2045, but we don't really know. There's a big question mark with the hydrogen. So all the assumptions were documented on that previous slide, but we're assuming that the generation of hydrogen gets cleaner from what it is today. Today, it's 99% of hydrogen is generated burning natural gas. A lot of methane gets out that way. Definitely not climate friendly. But we're assuming that that changes between now and 2040. So we're assuming that the carbon intensity of hydrogen generation goes down 50% by 2040. It may be more, it may be less, but that's what the estimates are showing here. Any questions there? All right. So now we're going to get into the.
I had a question on that. Can you go back one?
Sure.
So that blue bar in 2040, that's just recognizing that the hydrogen will never be that green.
We're assuming that hydrogen won't be completely green at that point. That's a good comparison to make. So it's not going to be WTA emissions. Your emissions from a fuel cell will be a little bit of water vapor. Yeah, these are upstream emissions from the generation of hydrogen. So yes, WTA,
and that's a lot more than PSCs. So that's like
that's what we're assuming. That's what we're assuming.
without.
Yep. But that again is kind of a big question mark. We're assuming it gets a lot better than it is today, but isn't going to be perfect by 2040. That may change. But that's the assumption here.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you're showing the emissions for electricity generation and hydrogen generation. Do you also show the emissions for diesel generation?
No, we don't. That's a hard number to put your finger on, but we do kind of caveat that largely in the report and note that it's not really a fair comparison because we're looking at just burning diesel that in reality mining, extracting, transporting, all of that has a really big climate impact. So no, it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison, and it's a good point to raise. So thank you for noting that.
Then I want to tag on to that because you just said there's all these other things involved, but what about building and making batteries? That takes mining and all kinds of extra activities. And I guess I'm going to assume that when we pay twice as much for one of these buses, it's a lot of it has to do with energy going into it somehow. And is that taken into account anywhere?
It's not. So the kind of the upstream emissions from the manufacturing of these are not taken into account. I mean, I know from other research, Yale came out with some research a couple years ago that said that, and this is for electric vehicles, not for buses, that yes, building an electric vehicle is more carbon intensive than building a traditional internal combustion engine, but that kind of those baked in emissions kind of even out after about 1.5 to 2 years because it's so much cleaner to drive a zero emission vehicle. So yes, there is obviously more that goes into building those vehicles, and I'm sure that the same is true of electric buses versus a diesel bus. But over the life cycle, it's not a very close comparison. But yeah, there is obviously something to be said for that. But all that is not included in these emissions calculations. Right. So kind of your transition timeline. So again, I'm going to state here kind of what's in the near term. So 2 more electric buses coming sometime this year. Those are going to be the same battery size as the ones that you currently operate, the 440 kilowatt hours. Going to get 8 more next year, and those will be the bigger battery size, the 588. So those will be a significant increase in energy density. Those should be able to drive a lot longer before they need to charge. So that's exciting. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, hybrid replacements between 2025 and 2027. And then in 2027, that's when you're going to have to order your next kind of tranche of ZEBs. So I think it's an order of 7 is currently slated for 2027 that would be delivered in probably 2028. So the big question mark is what do you do at that point? So that's what we're going to discuss here. So what do we expect to happen with this technology? So I mentioned earlier, better batteries is definitely something that we are expecting and have seen. We're forecasting about a 5% increase in energy density per year. Although I note that the last 3 years saw about a 30% increase, that jump from 440 that I mentioned earlier up to that 588. So really big. They kind of come in leaps and bounds. They don't really come at 5% incrementally each year, but we are expecting this trend to continue. So the graph that we're showing here at the bottom is the battery sizes needed to complete WTA fixed route operations as they are today. So for example, you could swap out 16 of your existing diesel buses with buses that had a battery capacity of 400 kilowatt hours. And then if you go a little bit higher up, so if you get to battery capacities, well, they already are at 550. The ones that you have bought and are coming next year are going to be at 588. You only need 4 that are at that size. So essentially, you could buy 24 buses today, which is a sizable portion of your daily needs. I think it's just about half. You use about 49 buses in your daily operations. Half of them could be electric today, given the existing technology, without any changes to your daily operations.
That operational, though, that's not for electricity infrastructure. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, thank you. This assumes you have all the charging infrastructure and electricity on the back end. This is just, can the bus slot into your existing operations and drive as much as it needs to drive before it comes back and needs to charge? So about half of your fleet could be operated with electric bus technology that you can go out and buy today. And then the graph also shows what you would need in terms of battery improvements to operate a fully electric fleet. So you need battery capacities all the way up to 800 kilowatt hours to do a full one-to-one replacement. You'd need about 7 vehicles of that size. And so that's what the rest of the graph is showing. Question there, Todd?
Yeah, I'm not quite following. It's just, I looked at the graph, like, are there 16 buses at 400 and there's only 1 bus at 450 available on the market, or what? How do those numbers?
Sorry, so this is how many buses. So essentially what we're trying to show here is that as you if you transition to a fully electric fleet, during the transition process, you're going to have a bunch of buses that have different battery capacities. So this is a theoretical exercise of what battery capacities you would need to do a one-to-one replacement today. So if somebody came to you tomorrow and said, hey, you could have 16 buses with a battery capacity of 400 kilowatt hours, which is less than what you could buy today, and you could take those 16, slot them straight into your daily operations with no issues. If one became available at 450, you could take that one and slot that one in next. And then 500, you could take 3 at that size. So basically, once you get to, it's really cumulative. So if battery capacity gets to 700 kilowatt hours, you could take everything below that and slot that directly into your operations.
So does that seem like right now we could swap out 16 diesel buses that are driving short enough routes that they could replace by 400 kilowatt battery?
Yes.
Buses.
And so the gray shaded bit is what you can purchase today. So a 40-foot bus that you can buy today that you're going to be taking delivery of next year, at 588 kilowatt hours, you could buy 24 of those today and have no changes to your daily operations. That's what this is showing. And then if the battery capacity increases a little bit, you can buy another chunk of buses. So this is kind of theoretical breakdown of what your fleet needs are.
Paul, clarifying question. Are these nominal battery sizes or
Yes.
service?
These are nominal battery sizes. Thank you, Tim. So the report, and we talked about this a little bit last time, that the actual usable amount of this goes down quite a bit as the manufacturers kind of place limits on the batteries to try to extend their life frame. But these are nominal battery sizes. Alrighty. then what else do,
Jen was
sorry.
asking if these buses are on the same replacement schedule as our diesel fleet.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so if you're taking delivery of hybrid vehicles to 2027, so that's what we're assuming, that those buses won't be retired until 2039. And at that point, given this trajectory, we fully expect 800 kilowatt hour batteries to be available. Yes, we expect the transition to occur that way, that it's going to be in leaps and bounds that way if you go with electric buses. Does that answer your question?
I think I get when we do transition to the electric buses, do they have the same, I guess, maybe lifespan as a diesel vehicle? And this may have been answered a long time ago, but I don't remember.
That's okay. Yeah. Yes, a lot of them will have the 12-year warranty, same as your diesel vehicles. Some manufacturers do require an additional battery warranty to get to that point. You pay a little bit more upfront, and then they warranty the battery for those 12 years. And if something happens to the battery over that period, they will replace it. Depends on the manufacturer. Mark, is there anything you would add to that?
Take myself off mute. No, I think you pretty much covered it. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Paul, I think maybe part of Jen's first question was about, will the battery electric bus technology keep up with our procurement schedule? I think that maybe was her question. And I think what I'm hearing and seeing and reading is that, yes, we have enough time that the technology will be able to adapt when we get to the point where we're going to need vehicles for those longer routes. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That's what we expect. Yeah.
I guess what I would throw in there, and we're already seeing foreshadowing of this in actual orders, is the OEM's ability to build the buses to meet demand is going to be constrained, and it's going to be a problem because pretty much every agency is in the same position that you guys are right now, right? And so they've got their feelers out, they've got their pilot program going, they're working on their rollout plan, they've got a theoretical replacement based on the the life cycle of the bus and FTA rules, and then everybody's going to just all of a sudden be in the same place, right? Because everybody's buses are going to continue to age out, and then we just think there's going to be some supply chain issues on the vehicle side. There may be also on the charging infrastructure side, but I think that's less likely.
Thanks, Mark.
Didn't mean to throw out a wet blanket.
No. It's all good.
It got real quiet.
Okay, so the other thing, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, talking about the increased availability of hydrogen. So there's a state bill here in Washington, State Bill 5910, that is aimed to make Washington a hub of local hydrogen production. It's got a bunch of money behind it. A lot of that comes from Washington's portion of the infrastructure bill, and the infrastructure bill has $8 billion for clean hydrogen research and development. The other thing we note here is that the U.S. Department of Energy goal that I touched on earlier of getting hydrogen down to $2 a kilogram by 2026, it's a really aggressive goal. We assumed that it would be more expensive than that till the mid 2030s. And then I also mentioned earlier that the Douglas PUD has hydroelectric hydrogen production starting in 2024. So it's going to be interesting to see that one. They're currently building it. I think they've even started breaking ground on phase 2. They're already going straight to expansion on that one before the first phase even opens, which is interesting. But yeah, mid next year, green hydrogen coming out of Washington, which is pretty exciting.
Paul?
Yep.
This is Michael again. Can you guess or tell me what is the smallest viable scale for a hydrogen production facility? Presumably that's larger than WTA's needs, but it might be the right size for, say, 2 counties? You know, if we can get electricity, what is the smallest reasonable hydrogen facility someone could consider building that would make sense?
That's a great
And how
question.
big a service area, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. Mark, do you have a good answer to that? I know there are other transit agencies who've built electrolyzers on site or are working on it.
Yep. Sunline in Southern California is got one up and running. I want to say, geez,
I can't remember how big their fleet is.
It would be comparable, I believe, but you know, and they're really experimental. Their GM Lauren she's really into this. She's convinced that hydrogen is the way to go. I'm not going to say it isn't, but I think there's a lot of good things behind hydrogen. I guess my thinking on this would be, if you're going to use an electrolyzer, which is really the only way to go if you're actually going to be concerned about zero emission, right? Yeah, you still have to have an awful lot of power brought to the site to do that. And then you got to think about, well, where's my power coming from, and is it green, and all of that. But I think more fundamentally, if you think about your diesel fleet, you're not going to drill an oil well in the middle of your bus base, right? Why would you get into the energy production business if your business is transit? I think you leave the fuel, whether it's electric or hydrogen, to the people that specialize in that, and you take deliveries of hydrogen from a truck just like you do diesel. And the nice thing about hydrogen, the thing that keeps folks like Mike Bro and myself up at night, is it's built-in resiliency, just like diesel is, right? You got a tank sitting on site that's going to fuel your buses for a certain period of time. I'm not against battery electric buses. I just can tell you they're a lot more complex to think through on just about every aspect in terms of service planning and one-to-one replacement. Where do we get the power from? If the power grid, grid power goes down, can we rely on a second circuit from the utility, or are we going to have some very large, very expensive on-site power generation? And photovoltaic, even in Southern California or Arizona, where it's sunny all the time, is not a practical answer for most owners. You just don't have the acreage.
Well, I really want to keep pursuing this. If a lot of people are going to be trying to create hydrogen, I don't think WTA has to come up with a solution on our own. But then again, if your off-the-rack hydrolyzer in the future will be X size, and that's about WTA size, I don't know if it's going to be that difficult. Hydrogen is not, I think, properly conceived of as a fuel. What you're doing is you're just converting. You're converting solar to electric, electric to hydrogen, hydrogen to electricity, and then into motion, right? It's a vector rather than a fuel. And so if you're going to have to move electricity across the state to charge your buses, or electricity across the state to create hydrogen, it's kind of not that different. So I'm trying to figure out the economies of scale for hydrogen production, because someone's going to be doing it. Who and at what scale? That's really my question.
Yeah, I guess what I would say there is, if you get trucked hydrogen, chances are pretty good you're going to go with liquid hydrogen, right? So you're going to get the maximum amount of capacity out of that storage unit. In order to liquefy hydrogen, you need an awful lot of energy. And there are places where, people can create hydrogen plants to do that. And again, it's just, my analogy is simply, it's like having an oil refinery. It's not necessarily something you want to have all that complex technology on your site. It sounds like a great idea. When we first started doing this, it seemed like, hey, we'll just take photovoltaics and we'll charge our buses. And the sad reality is that in just about every environment, that the amount of energy you can get out of a photovoltaic array doesn't come close to charging a battery electric fleet. It may be 1/10, 1/20th of the power that you need based on an average sized bus yard.
I mean, I just want to jump in here real quick here. And I just want to make sure that everybody is also looking past the obvious here and looking at the big picture. 2040, 2050 deadlines that the government has kind of mandated upon the entire industry, not just the bus industry, but the power generation industry and so forth. All of those same goals are also applied to all of the freight that is being transported across this country, all of your ferries that you have. I mean, anything that right now is being used that is relying upon a fossil fuel is destined to be converted to zero emissions. So specific to the hydrogen generation hubs, that's the reason why the Department of Energy is placing so much money available to spur this. In other words, they want to just basically give you a free loan at this point just to build the infrastructure, just to create these opportunities. And I mean, the Pacific Northwest is a huge opportunity because of the fact that you have so much available in terms of green electricity to be able to actually make green hydrogen. A lot of the other places in the country are struggling trying to figure out where this green electricity is supposed to be coming from. Up in the Pacific Northwest, it's a prime opportunity. And I see the Pacific Northwest as being one of the prime locations for the Department of Energy to throw a ton of funding to create one of those hubs. I mean, to put it in perspective, in New York State specifically, in Rochester, New York, a company called Plug Power has already spent all their own money actually creating a facility to generate 500 tons of hydrogen per day in Rochester, New York. Sounds like, why in the world would you do that? But I mean, now in Rochester, they have, the Erie Canal and all sorts of other areas to be able to transport from. That's the main reason why they did that. So, I mean, I would not be looking into creating the hydrogen on site because I think that in your own backyard, you should have one of these big hydrogen hubs in a very short order.
Thanks, Mike. All right, I'm going to scoot ahead here. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to talk about the rest of the timeline. So for your recommended timeline coming out of the report here, so from now really until mid next year, we're going to say continue with your Plan BEB deployments, explore charge management software tools. I know you already have one, but dive into that a little bit more to make sure you understand how that works and monitor all these changes that are coming. So much has changed since we even started this study last year. So there's a lot of change that's coming. It's coming fast. And then our recommendation is that by really mid-year next year, you need to decide on your propulsion technology for 2027. We're saying for your next 5 years, but it's really for your next order in 2027. But I think it would be good to have your next kind of 5 years all decided at that point. And the reason for that is because you need to do all those site upgrades. You need to build, acquire those chargers or build a hydrogen fueling station, train your staff. There's a lot that goes into deploying these things at scale. So we've listed out here kind of 5 questions that we think WTA needs to be able to answer before they make that decision. So the first one is, can WTA procure hydrogen reliably at a reasonable cost? And 2, can you procure fuel cell buses reliably? They're also very constrained on the supply chain side. How well are your electric buses operating? What's their uptime like? Is the next generation that you're taking delivery of here soon, are they operating better than the ones that you currently have? Has that electric bus battery capacity continued to improve as we expect? And then what level of electrical improvements are needed as you kind of work with PSC to figure out what is needed to bring that additional power load. So we think those are kind of the 5 main questions you need to be able to answer that will help you kind of figure out what happens in 2027 and beyond. And I know that's really soon. But the rest of the timeline here kind of lays out what to do between then and 2027. So then we're saying in 2024, you're gonna do some more site design, get your really detailed design for for the selected technology for the electric buses or the hydrogen fueling station. We kind of presented a high level overview, but we're talking really specific engineering design for, you know, for where all the cabling is going to go, where the power is going to be brought in, all of that stuff. We're saying that happens in 2024, maybe into 2025. And then, you know, late 2025, you purchase and start installing the next round of chargers or the hydrogen fueling station, depending on what technology is selected. Keep coordinating with PSC on your electrical service upgrades. You start looking into where you might put chargers for paratransit vehicles as you think about electrifying your paratransit fleet. And then 2026, you've got additional MOAB site improvements. Those are the safety systems that we talked about, maintenance bay upgrades, start doing more staff training, and then you would likely order some paratransit vehicles. I know we haven't touched on paratransit a lot. It's covered in the report, but it was kind of too much to include here. And the orders of magnitude costs are so much lower than the fixed route fleet that we wanted to focus on the fixed route fleet here. So that then in 2027, you hit order on that next order of 7 electric buses, and you probably start bringing your first zero emission paratransit vehicles into operation. And then for the next few years after that, you're going to take delivery of 13 more ZEBs, continue paratransit ZEB replacements, and then over that time start planning for that 2023 or that 2032 ZEB technology deployment. So let's say you go electric buses for the next 5 years. And then as you start taking delivery of those, you keep monitoring where these technologies are going and plan for the future. And maybe you switch to hydrogen at that point, depending on how all this stuff is shaking out. This is kind of the recommended timeline for the next, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there's a lot going on in that time frame. So I'm going to end it there. I know we're at 3:59, but if folks have questions, I think we're all happy to stay a little bit.
And I put a couple of links in the chat to some of the information on the Sunline system. The one that's running right now is 900 kilograms a day, and basically, I think it's a 5-bus fuel cell fleet. They're partnered up with Southern California Gas, and what they don't say in the article is that pretty soon Southern California Gas is not going to be able to distribute natural gas to anybody because of our air quality management district. So they have to get into the hydrogen business or go out of business. So they've got a vested interest in developing hydrogen infrastructure that might be somewhat unique in the country.
Scott, you have something?
Yeah, I had a question. So if we do all this, it's going to cost a lot of money. And I guess, has anybody done the math on if we get federal grants like we're getting today, how much more money it's going to cost WTA, so we can start to plan for that? If and I guess that assumes that the federal pot doesn't dry up or other people get to it first.
Yeah. So Scott, this is Les. You raised a great question. The timeline on this, the IIJA and others are a 5-year bill. A lot of this runs after that 5-year bill, so that's an unknown what the grant situation will look like. It's post-election too, so don't know what that'll do. What I think it does highlight, though, is that with the other transformational things that WTA 2040 is looking at, such as on-demand, such as transit-oriented development, such as rapid transit and so forth, we need to lay these out to be able to see what the ramifications are of all these, and what the dollar amounts are, so that we can take a look and see how to do it over time. Where that'll be something we'll have to work on between now and beginning of next year to stay on that timeline that Transpo laid out.
I guess I assume it goes without saying that we can't do this plan without government subsidy or grants and things like that from the federal government.
Correct.
Yep.
Yes.
And the other things that
or yeah, at least with the other items. But that's where we need to do the analysis, get this completed, and then do these other things so that we can actually have a discussion about what the trade-offs are on what things can and cannot get done, depending on the financial capacity of WTA over that planning horizon. That's our task to do. Because it's hard to look at this in a vacuum as comparison to these other things too.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one question. So are there any estimates about the battery electric buses or the fuel cell buses coming down, or maybe just stabilizing to the same price as diesel or hybrids? Or is there not any estimates out in the future which one might be cheaper?
It's a great question. Mike, are you still around? I'd like to toss that to you.
As with anything, the economies of scale is usually what is the main differentiator in terms of price reduction. And right now, because of the fact that agencies are pretty much going after pilot procurements, it's kind of holding the price of the vehicle itself at an unrealistic high point. But at the same time, as more and more conversions occur throughout the entire industry, the major components that are the factor in that price, which is batteries and also the actual propulsion systems themselves, as more and more larger operations, such as trucking, such as I said, ferries and things like that start to get on board, then the economies of scale should kick in. And I don't know how much of a reduction we could expect, but at the same time, I would say that it would at least stabilize the prices themselves and prevent inflation from pushing them up even further than what they are right now. I mean, if it's any consolation, I mean, I kind of use Tesla as the guideline for trying to understand the effects of economies of scale. And Tesla has actually reduced the price of their cars 3 times now in the last, I'm going to say the last 24 months now. So, it's not because it's costing them less to manufacture. It's just that, because of the economies of scale, they're able to increase their market share, basically is what they're trying to do, because there is competition now. They're able to push the price down. So I see that same economies of scale and competition kicking in the class 6, 7, and 8 transportation systems, of which buses are part of, probably pretty quickly here. It's just definitely going to be there. And as I said, when you start to factor in the hydrogen hubs, where now you have increased competition from that form of propulsion system, I mean, all of these things should, I would say, combine to, like I said, either lower or at least level out the cost itself, all this stuff.
I have a question. So it may not be possible to go all with, but wouldn't it be wise to go all with one technology? The problem with 2 technologies is you have 2 support things you have to support. But if you did have to go with a mixed model, mostly one, a little of the other, what is the best mixed model?
I'm assuming you want me to take this one too, right, Paul?
If you wouldn't mind.
We've been doing the modeling now all across the country, actually all across North America now. And I mean, the honest answer is it's going to be entirely dependent upon your demographics. In other words, how your service is structured, the frequency of service, the span of service. I mean, there's so many different variables that go into this. I mean, a perfect example. I mean, I did an analysis for an agency in Southern California that had 2 locations, and just by happenstance of the analysis, one location, 100% of their operation was 100% supported by fuel cell, and the second operation was 100% supported by battery. And that's exactly the business model that they decided to file with CARB. One facility would be fuel cell, one facility would be battery electric. I mean, I do see in places like New York City Transit, for example, where you're going to have those two technologies combined into a single facility, only because that's exactly what it is that the route structure and the ridership and just the business itself calls for just that operation.
So Michael, reading the tea leaves on Whatcom County, we already know we have many shorter routes, and we already know we have many county rural routes, and that's probably not going to change.
I mean, I believe in our analysis, we projected out at once we get to the 800 kilowatt hour energy storage system, you would be 100%, meaning that a battery electric bus option would be the best suited solution for the county to operate.
That sounds like an answer.
Is that 800?
I'm just reading the tea leaves. That's all I'm doing.
Is the 800 bus, is that counting a brand new bus, or is that counting one that's been degraded? Just wondering if we got a new bus that can do it, but we wait 2 years and then it can't do it anymore.
The 800, I believe in our analysis was done. Well, our analysis, we normally do new and basically depleted. We give you both ranges so that when you write a schedule, I can write a schedule where you got all brand new buses this year, but 6, 7, 8, 9 years down the road, if the range is going to decrease because of the battery, it's not realistic. So all of these things are in the report that we did for you. But the one thing I will tell you though is there's a lot of agencies where their buses are coming to the 12-year mark. And one of the things that was actually pretty interesting is that the battery degradation, we were predicting it to go down to about 80%. And they're proving us wrong. I mean, I've seen buses that are 12 years old where some of the batteries are still at 92%. So, I mean, it's kind of at this point now, I mean, it's all dependent upon the operation and what kind of a severe duty cycle or a soft duty cycle that the vehicle is placed on. That's what's going to determine the life of the vehicle and the battery itself. The one thing I also want to make sure that everybody does have a clear understanding though is a fuel cell bus is essentially a battery electric bus that is a hybrid. So all of the same things that you have in a battery electric bus are also going to be on the fuel cell bus, such as batteries and the propulsion system.
Allie had to leave, so I guess I'm chairing the meeting. Is there any further questions from the board? Next steps, when do we expect the actual written report and what do we do next?
Okay, so we've submitted the final comments on the draft report. So once those get changed by Paul's team, we'll get the final report, and that's the one we'll share with the board. Probably the final draft in case you have comments. If you want to go to the, 150-page document, you're welcome to. And Paul, we should have that ready probably within the next couple of weeks.
Yes, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we'll presumably mail that to you. If you want hard copies, we can mail it, bring it to a board meeting.
Let's save a few trees and we'll get it as a PDF, but if anyone wants a paper copy, just let them know and they will mail one to you.
Yeah, and the board meeting would be either the 16th or the June 1st to continue the discussion after the report.
Okay. Any further questions? Thanks everyone for making this special meeting. Seeing no further business, this special meeting is adjourned.